My name is Chris Stockel. I'm a retired DCG at UC-CAPOC and the former CG of the 351 Civil Affairs Command. I have the distinct honor of introducing Major General retired Dan Ammerman, my old boss at UC-CAPOC, and also our main panelist today, Major General Darrell Guthrie, a former CG also of UC-CAPOC and now CG of the 88th Readiness Division. So I will turn it over to Dan Ammerman to do the introductions. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, I'm former CG UC-CAPOC. I had the honor of handing over the flag to Major General Darrell Guthrie. He has quite a bit of experience, of course, in civil affairs, which allowed him to assume that role. He's worked in command and staff positions, company through division level. He was commander of 413th Civil, or was with 413th Civil Affairs Battalion. He was G5 Multinational Division in Afghanistan. He was commander of 492nd Civil Affairs Battalion in Arizona. He was also served in Iraq on a PRT in Saladin. He was commander of 321st Civil Affairs Battalion in San Antonio, Texas. He also was a commander of the 104th Training Division of the Army Reserve, and graduated U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, the Defense Strategy Course, Army War College, Distinguished Military Graduate, University of Alabama. And also he holds a Juris Doctorate as well as a MS in business, specializing in finance, in addition to a master's in strategic studies. So a lot of educational experience, or a lot of education, a lot of experience. And he has, I think he's going to talk to us about something that from his foxhole, where he's had a pretty unique experience taking that advanced knowledge, or that vast experience that he's had in civil affairs, and then tackling a tough problem that he had as commander of the 88th Readiness Division out of Fort McCoy, with the influx of Afghan refugees and all that happening on a relatively short timeline. So really excited to hear what General Guthrie has to say about that experience and share some of those learnings and what that means to the nation, our military, as well as our civil affairs force. With that, Darrell, would like your opening comments.
Okay, so hey everyone, and so I am coming to you in my official capacity, so I'll not give the normal disclaimer. I will if I provide an opinion along the way. But to Joe Kurland, Dan, you, Chris, all the association vice presidents and members of the board of directors, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you virtually today. And I've served alongside or under your leadership for many years. Therefore, it's great to see all of you on Zoom today, or know that you're out there listening. So as most of you are aware, I commanded UC-CAPOC from September 2017 to July 2020, and now command the 88th Readiness Division, which is responsible for providing more than 250 facilities to enable the provision of personnel and maintenance support operations to the 55,000 plus soldiers found in 600 plus units spread across a 19-state region from Ohio to the Pacific Northwest. And additionally, I'm the senior commander of Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, as well as now the senior mission commander for operations, or Operation Allies Welcome, at Fort McCoy. And so a few overarching comments on Operation Allies Welcome, or OAW. So between 17 August and 25 October, approximately 77,000 Afghan evacuees have arrived in the United States. Approximately 54,000 are currently on 8 DoD installations across the U.S. and the majority of Afghan evacuees who will be resettled work directly with the U.S. on its mission in Afghanistan, and that would be with our military, the diplomatic corps, or development efforts, or the family members of someone who did. So DoD's mission is to provide defense support to civilian authorities for the resettlement of Afghan evacuees. And in sum, everything Task Force McCoy, as we're known, is doing is enabling the success of resettlement of Afghans in communities throughout the United States. So I'm coming to you today from Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, where approximately 1,500 soldiers of Task Force McCoy are supporting the efforts of approximately 200 members of the interagency and non-governmental organizations to resettle what peaked at almost 13,000 evacuees. And presently, we still have just under 11,000 in our care. So Joe Curlin called me last week after he heard that Dan had roped me into this. And he said, hey, one of the last times that we resettled refugees in America was Cubans from the Freedom Flotilla in May 1980. So Joe was involved in that operation at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, while a sister site was operated at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. And so there might be some veterans of that mission on the call today. And what I wanted to do was sort of lay out some of the striking similarities despite 41 years of separation between those two events. So in 10 days, Fort McCoy received 15,000 Cubans. Here, this time around, we grew very fast as well and achieved our max capacity in 18 days. And as I tell people, scale has a certain quality, certain character all to itself. So command and control in 1980 was critical, and how you organized is important to mission success. And this is just as true now as it was then. The lines of responsibility, frankly, are clear today due to the DISCA construct. And as such, DoD forces are in support of the lead federal agency, which was first the Department of State, and then transitioned early on to the Department of Homeland Security. And while this DISCA structure did not exist in 1980, the organization of the task force, which were both called Task Force McCoy, was remarkably similar. So messaging was critical via media and to state and local and federal politicians in 1980, and it's probably even more important today in the social media rich information environment. So interaction with the governor and the adjutant general of Wisconsin were important in 1980. And so a dual status commander was appointed for operations at Volt Field, a Wisconsin operated National Guard facility, to ensure that federal and state friction that existed at Volt Field in 1980 did not manifest itself on this mission. So intelligence operations were missing in 1980. And today, the vetting of evacuees takes on a similar degree of importance. Legal jurisdiction for certain crimes was missing in 1980. And similarly, while there's great clarity on how to handle felony offenses, that's not as much when it comes to misdemeanor and petty matters involving our guests. So the importance of a joint visitors bureau is always important. And that was especially key early as military civilian leadership wanted to better understand the mission and challenges being faced by the Afghan evacuees. So protection of vulnerable groups, single females and children, was important with the Cubans. And it's a continuous interagency effort that has been critical since the start of OAW that has paid consistent dividends for us. Medical support requirements. Again, this has been critical to the operation, especially during the time of a pandemic, and is a huge part of dealing with a population that arrived in less than perfect condition. Behavioral health impacted Cubans and soldiers assigned to the mission alike. And while there have only been minor altercations involving our guests today, the reality is that with winter in Wisconsin, there will be less wandering around the post to clear the mind and more time spent inside in communal barracks. And the last point is the big difference between the Cuban resettlement and the Afghan resettlement mission is the Cuban refugees did not stay at Fort McCoy through the winter, while we are proceeding for a significant number of guests remaining here through the winter. So that's in fact critical to our planning efforts right now. So a couple of personal insights through the lens of civil affairs, from the lens of a civil affairs professional, as well as a couple of recommendations. So first, I want to quote from the new FM 3-57, and it says, a civil network is a collection of formal and informal groups, associations, military engagements, and organizations within an operational environment that interact with each other with varying degrees of frequency, trust, and collaboration. And so this was and is completely relevant as we've learned to trust and collaborate on the fly. It would be so much easier if some of these networks were already established. And I believe events like this one being hosted by the Civil Affairs Association contribute to a greater frequency, trust, and collaboration within the interagency, international organizations, and non-governmental organizations community that allow you to spin up fast. Most importantly, however, is once a resettlement site is established, the need to understand the population and its formal and informal structure is critical to success. So next, again from 3-57, the resulting civil knowledge is integrated with other knowledge about the operating environment to create shared understanding among commanders, unified action partners, international organizations, and civilian partners. So knowledge is power, and the ability to share and integrate it rapidly is critical to success in complex operations, and is critical and is essential to creating shared understanding across the interagency and here NGO representatives. And this is true whether you're in Syria or in Wisconsin, frankly. And third, one final quote, regional and cultural competencies are critical skills for interacting with people of different cultures. So cultural competence is critical to building relationships, interacting with people from different cultures. And we continue to struggle in this space when it comes to tribal, ethnic, and cultural norms. So a couple of recommendations from me. So DOD and the Department of the Army must better recognize the capabilities, skills, and talents that reside within USACAPOC and the civil affairs community writ large. So the demand is there for civil affairs forces in this DISCA mission set. For example, all 8 safe haven sites have requested civil affairs support. However, in my professional opinion, and in this case, this is my opinion and not necessarily that of the Department of Defense or the Department of the Army, there remains a sense of confusion if CA forces are restricted to operating only OCONUS. And frankly, do civil affairs forces also conduct psychological operations? And remember, both are in the name USACAPOC, and I think that sometimes adds to that confusion. Also, paragraph 1-44 of 3-57 states, CA forces enhance and enable information operations by identifying civil aspects of the information environment, assessing and evaluating civil indicators of information operations effectiveness within the AO, and providing actionable options to the supported commander's information operations plan regarding themes and messages. Civil affairs forces complete these actions and provide support to IO through the conduct of civil affairs operations. And civil affairs operations are an information related capability. In my opinion, again, and as developed during my tenure as the commanding general USACPOC, being considered an information related capability is profoundly important, because money and thought leadership like today is flowing to those providing these capabilities. Further, an operation like Allies Welcome is conducted in a rich information environment. For example, guest social media access has made the creation and communication of themes and messages relating to processing, guest health and welfare, and cultural assimilation to America critically important. And therefore, being able to enhance and enable information operations is critical to mission success and the long-term success of this mission and civil affairs. So in closing, for my formal remarks, and then I'll take questions, it's been my honor to be the senior mission commander of this operation since 13 August. The soldiers, interagency staff, and NGOs assigned here have been absolutely amazing. And that said, we're now in the midst of a transition to an Army Reserve force structure. Up until now, it's all been active component forces, with the exception of myself and some members of the 88th Readiness Division staff. And most interagency partners are in the process of a transition as well. So we have to keep it going and indeed consolidate gains achieved over the last 3 months. That include, here's some of them, successfully operating a city that's bigger than either Toma or Sparta, the two towns nearest to Fort McCoy. Fully vaccinating the population to include vaccinations that require multiple doses, like measles, mumps, and rubella, varicella, and COVID-19. Flawlessly executing a quarantine and isolation operation that peaked at more than 1,000 guests. Feeding our guests 3 hot meals a day, although admittedly sometimes it's not exactly what they want. And in cooperation with the American Red Cross and Team Rubicon, operating a donation center that literally has provided some guests the only clothes other than those that they were wearing when they departed Kabul. And now providing education opportunities to prepare our guests for life in America. Finally, last week, we even began operation of a mass transit system to ease transportation needs of guests in preparation for winter and during winter. And so finally, it's great being involved again with the Civil Affairs Association, and I now look forward to your questions. Over.
All right, Darrell, I got, could you talk to us a little bit about the initial first few days of this and some of the challenges around manning, funding, because you think about, food, lodging, medical, all those things. How did that all come together?
Yeah, so the initial start of this was pretty interesting. Okay, and so when I arrived, and so I got the notice on a Friday evening, which was the 13th of August, and I got over here on Monday evening, the 16th of August. And we actually thought we were going to start receiving guests within like the next couple of days after that. That didn't come into being. We didn't receive our first guest until the 22nd of August, but so we had 6 days to prepare. And the only forces we really had on the ground were some members of my organization, which really isn't, which is set up to provide maintenance support largely and personnel support. General Tony Aguto of First Army gave us control of the 181 Multifunctional Training Brigade, which resides on Fort McCoy. And that gave us a headquarters element and some leadership, senior leaders, which gave us the capability really to put a battalion commander on a problem. We actually started receiving Compo 1 or active component units the day before we started receiving guests. So we had to do just some visioning of how this would work. For those that are familiar with Fort McCoy, it does have a lot of barracks space because it is it's considered a warm mobilization site. And so we were able to utilize those barracks. So we start receiving Compo 1 soldiers the day before our guests start to arrive. And luckily, we didn't start receiving large number of guests until about day 5. So the first 4 days were a couple of plane loads a day, which was manageable. Had a 1-star general that came from the Pentagon, Chris Norrie, who heads the Army People First Task Force, and luckily had been the chief of the operations group out at the National Training Center. And Chris was a gifted at doing after action reviews. So the first plane load of guests we received, it took us about 6 hours to process them in. And by the second plane load that arrived, it took 3 hours. And then after that, we reduced that time down to about an hour, which became really, really helpful when we had a 5-day period where we received somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 guests a day. So the spin rate on what we were doing really was really, really very high. We started the first guests we had that arrived, we only had 2 members of the interagency on the ground. That picked up quickly, but they were also having to be integrated at the same time. So really the challenge from a people standpoint was integration. And I have to say, and I told somebody this a couple of days ago, if you're familiar with poker, I like drew an inside straight, not once, but like 10 times in a row. I've never frankly worked with a group of people where none of us wore the same patch that operated so well together. And that's frankly been kind of the amazing part of this. From the logistics side of it, I saw the Army really turn its focus on solving a problem. So the log camp capability was available, and we tapped into that. But I had the full support of General Daly and his team at AMC to actually make sure we could care for our guests. The biggest challenge, frankly, was feeding. And we had one kind of interesting thing that came up along the way as we stood DFAC, dining facilities up. we had one subcontractor that actually came from Louisiana, and Hurricane Ida hit about the same time. And so they didn't arrive with all of their people, but we needed all of their capability, and we just had to work through that. It took a few days to accomplish that, but we did. And frankly, I really have to say, had the Army not really turned its focus on this logistics piece, that could have been a significant challenge for caring for our guests, but it really did. Part of that logistics piece was also a medical piece. So there's a large medical contractor contingent that's here that provides roll to care for our guests. And our guests were they were beat up when they arrived. I mean, it's just a fair statement to say they were just really beat up. They were tired. And so we saw things like dehydration and some things like that early on that we don't see today. Now we see sort of different challenges, but that roll to capability ultimately was provided by a contracting solution. But at the start, it was part of a field hospital that came in on a request for forces that provided a lot of that care. So hopefully that answered.
Thank you, Darrell. The first question is from Brian Hancock. I don't know if you're available to ask the question. Brian, his question relates to information systems that you were able to use, I believe, for early on. So Brian, are you available to ask that question?
I think he was traveling, Dan. And
He's
so
traveling?
he sent me a note, the whole SIM CKI in America, that's where he's trying to go at. And, there's so many different systems out there. What did you find helpful, or what were you able to use, Darrell?
Yeah, so in all seriousness, so this is it's a State Department system that's used that gathers the information. I mean, so there was a significant, and I'm going to describe this, try to be logical, but I want everybody to sort of understand. We started receiving guests so quickly that the State Department system that actually would collect all the initial data was not online yet. So our first 5,000 to 6,000 guests, we were having to do it the old-fashioned Army way of Excel spreadsheet, just to collect names and family, grouping people together as families. The State Department system really was there to track them through the processing that they were going through, which consisted of biometric vetting done by the United States Customs and Immigration Service to get them enrolled I call it getting enrolled in the camp, and that's done by the International Relief Committee. The medical piece, there's a considerable amount of medical documentation that goes into having what ultimately that has become refugee status, but at the time we started, they were just parolees into the country. And then finally, that system is used for onward movement by the International Organization for Migration, which is who's contracted with by Department of State to resettle folks. Could we have used some other systems? Absolutely. It would have helped considerably early on to have had better demographic information about our guests. We have some of that. We have it now, but at the start we didn't. We just sort of anecdotally knew, hey, we've got a lot of kids, and it's turned out that 31% of our population here is under the age of 12. So almost a third are very young people. Anecdotally, you could tell that there were slightly more males than females, but that was just anecdotal. We now know that about 55% of our population is male and 45% is female. But perhaps what was most missing was some ethnic or tribal information. And so, and frankly, we still don't have that. And I don't know that we ever will. In some ways, I think that may be good because people are gonna resettle into America. But it does in a camp setting. It would be interesting information to have available if we had it, and it might help us during the winter months, frankly. The final thing that we've used is WhatsApp. So we've used WhatsApp to communicate with our guests on a more broad spectrum. They can sign up to be part of the group on WhatsApp. And that way we can let them know various things that may be going on. For example, when the bus service started, it was a way to communicate the bus schedule and stuff like that. So hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Darrell. Amelia, are you available to ask your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, General Guthrie, for your presentation, and of course the amazing work that you're doing with the Afghan evacuees, your guests. So my question is whether there is a system in place to coordinate and share with the other bases that are also hosting Afghan guests across those 19 states, I think you mentioned, and if this sort of platform used for continuous lessons learned and vision and change of practice. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are 8 sites. And frankly, there's the only system that exists is kind of what the military does to coordinate. So we have initially it was every day of the week. We had meetings, and frankly, a lot of it was focused on lessons learned. And so Fort McCoy, along with Fort Bliss, received the bulk of the early arriving Afghan evacuees. So the lessons that we learned really were shared with others, and in some cases it allowed them to move a little bit quicker on some things than here. Now, the interagency has the same set of meetings, and over time there were a lot of different things to share, a lot focused on the care for our guests. Over time, that has really shifted to onward movement type tasks. We hear this thing about having 5,000 to 6,000 people that were not in the Hummingbird database initially. Meant we had to hand jam a whole bunch of information. So at the start of the assurance process, we weren't getting a lot of people assured. That's changed recently. And assurance is where the resettlement organization reaches out to the 9 non-governmental organizations across the United States that actually manage the resettlement process through state and local partners and nonprofits spread across the country. And so while we were hand jamming information into the system, we were also learning some things about the system itself, which I think is helping us now. So all of the lessons learned piece was really sort of occurring in real time via kind of a mosaic of meetings, which I think many of the folks on this call were probably all familiar with them. So whether they have occurred at a CMOC or whether they've occurred in, I'm trying to think of some of the names early on in Afghanistan that were used, I guess a humanitarian assistance cell or center. Similar process here. So now 3 days a week, we have a task force update. 3 days a week, there's a interagency coordination center update. So one of those is in the morning, one is in the afternoon, and then lots of working group meetings that occur, over the course of every day to coordinate the movement of our guests, especially now that we're starting to move them. A lot of the focus is on that, as well as protection related issues protection related issues to make sure that we're protecting whether it's young children or elderly or family members. And we do a great deal of coordination in that area. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you very much, General Guthrie, and thank you, General Ammerman, as well, for the voice.
Welcome. Yeah. Darrell, you talked earlier about problems with access to CA forces, and so you see that the reason you had issues with access, is it related to doctrine? Is it related to the RFF process? Was it related to funding to get forces to support you? Where do you think the fix? Which areas do you think the fix lies in this for the next similar event?
Yeah, so I think so. I'll just give you, and again, now this is my opinion. So this is certainly not DOD's or the Department of the Army's opinion or position. But in my opinion, it's a little bit of a combination of things. So one, I think historically, we've always been focused on that we do our work external to the United States. So now there were civil affairs units that were involved with the Freedom Flotilla. There were also civil affairs units that were involved with Hurricane Andrew years ago. But the vast majority, I think, of our doctrine speaks of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief occurring outside of CONUS. So I think part of it is a doctrine issue. Part of it is an access to forces issue. So it is a big, it's a big deal to get access to Compo 3. But in this case, the Army Reserve is now being accessed to provide soldiers to this mission. But that always takes time, even when you're utilizing those soldiers within CONUS. It still takes about 30 days once there's a unit order issued. But I think the bigger thing, and I think this is something, and I really like the subject for this symposium, is is to really start to clarify what capabilities that civil affairs forces actually bring, and especially as an information related capability. We've stood up, somewhat this type of capability, to be able to get feedback from a big population. So you can message a lot to people, and we've done that. But if you don't get feedback from them, and I would contend that's something that civil affairs forces especially do with local populations, whether that local population is here at Fort McCoy or some other place. It's that feedback that allows you to make better decisions about things. And you sort of think, and we have some cultural advisors here, and that's great, and they provide great advice to us, but there's only a few of them, and we have a population of at one time almost 13,000. And making sure you're getting feedback from all the groups that may be involved is kind of important. We've learned things over time about food, for example. So the meals, while they've all been halal meals, early on that included shrimp, and shrimp, not a popular dish with Afghans, mainly because in many cases they've never seen, tasted, or felt the texture of a shrimp. And so it took time to get that out of the meal cycle. But then it became, hey, there's certain ways to cook foods, and that would be more appealing to our guests. And what I would contend is civil affairs forces doing traditional civil affairs type missions where civil engagement would have helped us a great deal early on. And I think that was something that was seen at the other sites as well. So our soldiers, in fact, are our greatest messengers, and we've had that feedback. Okay, so right now, while the weather's still good, we'll have 4 or 5 soldiers standing out on every sort of block, and they're interacting with kids, talking to adults. We have themes and messages that we're asking them to push out to the populace, and we have billboards that have information posted on them. But ultimately, civil affairs soldiers are trained, at least at a rudimentary level, on cultural competencies. And I would contend that would, things like that can help us a great deal in a mission like this. So right now, to my knowledge, there are 2 civil affairs folks on the ground here. You're looking at one of them, and there's a major who's been doing great work for us. But I think we've got to work through this and be able to continue to tell our story better about what capabilities we actually bring to a mission. Over.
Thank you, Darrell. Stanislava has a question related to assessment. Stanislava, are you available to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was already partly addressed by the General. Thank you, General, for this wonderful brief. And it basically, just if you could elaborate a little bit more on what you already mentioned, which is, do you have Knowing what we know from doing this in other settings and the importance of engaging with the populace, are there any easy, agile, systemic ways in which you could assess needs, whether it be through quick surveying of the population, through just qualitative engagement where you talk to them? I think it's wonderful that you have people standing on every block. I just spent a month at Quantico doing this work with one of the partners there. And I know that the touch point is much more between the military and the populations than between, in some cases, the interagency and the population. So you are really that connective mechanism between the community, the client in this case, the guests, and those seeking to form themselves to help them. So I think you have a very unique role. And I was just wondering, knowing everything we know, and I love your example about the shrimp, knowing everything we know, what are some things you've mobilized quickly that have worked for you thus far?
So so one, that's a really good question. And you've at least seen one of the other places, and you saw the one place where there were some civil affairs forces early on, some Marine Corps civil affairs units. Did some work early on at Task Force Quantico. I think one of the things that we learned sort of early on, but it took us a while to get it in place, was this need to communicate more broadly and deeply with our Afghan evacuees, and so probably like every place, there's now a series of meetings. Frankly, they started initially with women's groups. So we had a lot of meetings with women's groups because we've got a couple, we've got some varying different groups here. We've got a group of university students that were part of the Asian Women's University in Kabul. And then we expanded that to elders meetings groups, big town halls where we communicated or made ourselves available. And these were mainly done by the interagency. So this grassroots thing were soldiers, but our interagency here became the face of meetings with the populace. But this idea of being able to did everyone hear the message, is what we've really been working on over the last 2 weeks, because we got some feedback from some cultural advisors that said, hey, not everybody may be hearing your message. And so we started doing surveying now we use our soldiers to do that. And we also use our WhatsApp application to do that, to ask a series of questions. What did you hear at this meeting? There are a lot more granularity than that, but they're all questions that go to either confirm that the message was heard, or equally if there were gaps, so we can double tap on that. In our population, and I'm sure the population at all the sites, very, very social media savvy, which means they hear, lots and lots of different things over social media. We recognized that was going to be key terrain in military terms kind of early on, was the information environment. But it's remained, it has remained a challenge. We have a very engaged media here in Wisconsin. And so if we have guests that engage outside, and we have some journalists within our population. So they're establishing relationships with other journalists. And you're usually way behind the target unless you're one, communicating with the population, or two, and I think this is this thing about feedback. That is neighborhoods.
You froze up a little bit, Darrell.
Is this
Hey, Dan, maybe he'll unfreeze in a second. I think he dropped and he's going to try to relog in. So maybe we'll just go to Darrell for any closing comments and
Okay.
then try to wrap it up in 4 or 5 minutes. That'll give everybody 3 or 4 minutes to reset, and then I can
Okay.
log off and log on with the new ID. Thanks.
Okay, all right.
Good job there.
Sounds good. We'll see if he's able to join us.
I guess I don't see him in the waiting room yet. Dan, as the former KPOC up, Darrell's back on.
Hi, Darrell.
Dan, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. You show, I heard you briefly and then.
Had to
you went back
move.
Yep, there you go. Okay. Can you finish up then with some closing comments? We're down to about the 3-minute mark.
Yeah, so I really was kind of I was actually at the end of what my comments were, which is this idea of being able to survey who you're communicating with becomes really important. And that has to be done a variety of ways, because what we did find, this was my really closing thought, is we found that we had certain blocks that were not getting the information that was being provided to sort of our elders meetings. And so what that tells you is then you've got to communicate with them in a slightly different fashion. Over.
Yeah, Darrell, thank you very much for speaking to us about Operation Welcome Allies, or Allies Welcome rather, and very good lessons I think for our military and our nation, and good insights I think for the way ahead for civil affairs also, in terms of how do we bring our capabilities to bear on issues like this, and also the importance of networking. So thank you much, Darrell. Thanks for joining us, and I'll turn it on over to Chris.
So Dan, thanks for that. Darrell, thanks for chiming in, and really appreciate the way you're working the interagency. And I think your one comment about there's a major general and a major that's civil affairs qualified. And so I thought that was pretty good. So thanks, everyone. We'll close this session out, and we'll have about give me about 2 minutes, and I'll open up the next room. And that's link will, this last link will work for the 1400 meeting, and then the 15 to 1700 meeting. So thanks, everybody. I'll see you all in a few minutes. Thanks again, Dan.
Yeah,
Take care,
thank
bye.
you. Yeah, bye.
Bye, guys.